Well, Georgia O'Keeffe, the iconic American painter, was famous for her semi-abstract works capturing the beauties of the desert and the open skies and flowers, but she did live and paint here in the city for many years. And as a woman artist, she said she was told, and I quote, "What are you going to paint New York City for anyway? You can't do that. The men haven't even done very well with it. What do you think you're going to do?"
Now, O'Keeffe managed to do just fine with those streets and skyscrapers before moving out west and went on to become one of the 20th century's great American artists, all while being not just a woman, but an icon of modernism. This Friday at the Brooklyn Museum, an exhibit called Georgia O'Keeffe Living Modern shows her work and how she inspired the work of others. The exhibit's curator is Wanda Corn, and she joins us right now. Wanda, thank you so much for being here on BK Live.
I'm delighted to be here.
It's our pleasure. I love Georgia O'Keeffe. I was telling you off the air. I want to know why Georgia O'Keeffe. In other words, what is it about this legendary artist that still grabs people's attention in 2017?
Well, she was a great painter, and she was a modern painter. So she was one of the first painters that we might identify as an abstractionist. You mentioned it earlier in your remarks that she was really daring to move away from literal mimicking of what's out there in nature and create these beautiful abstractions. That's one way she survives. She also survives because she was a very interesting looking person. She had a kind of persona that had come through photographs and photographs that circulated widely during her lifetime. And thirdly, she lived a very long life. She died on the eve of her 99th birthday. That means she got a whole revived set of, a whole second set of admirers, younger people, especially during the 60s and 70s, that gave her career another boost at the point when she herself was in her 70s and 80s.
Okay, you know, I have to put it in context. Now, I understand that she had her first show in 1927 at the Brooklyn Museum.
Yes, it wasn't her first show, it was her first museum show.
First museum
She
show.
had had gallery shows before that. Not many, but 2 or 3 of them. But this was the first time she was actually what we might call institutionalized for her art. Only 15 paintings in a very small show, but it was a big deal because it was in the Brooklyn Museum.
And what else can you tell us about Georgia O'Keeffe's history in terms of New York City and then New Mexico and all the other places she visited?
Yeah, those are her 2 big places. New York City, but we have to say actually Lake George is a spur of New York City because she would spend summers in Lake George where her husband, Alfred Stieglitz, had a family home. And then New Mexico, which she began to visit while married, while living in New York City. But she decided the West called her. She needed to be in the big, wide open spaces. And beginning in 29, she would go out and spend summers there. So she had kind of it wasn't quite bi-coastal because the Southwest is really inland, but she really did have a 2-state residency from about 1930 on.
That's great.
Now, can you tell us how is the exhibit sort of organized? I mean, for somebody who has such a breadth of work, you know, what are we going to see at this exhibit, and how is it new from exhibits that she's done in the past?
Well, the new part is that we're going to see pieces of her clothing, her wardrobe, beautiful pieces of her clothing that have never been on view before. I think you're looking at one probably right now.
What year was this piece of clothing
We
from?
can only say the 20s because we have to date them impressionistically and by looking at it, studying it. But here's the big point. I am attributing this costume to her. She actually made these dresses, not just acquired them or having somebody else make them. She was an excellent seamstress, and none of us have ever paid any attention to that before.
Wow, so you could call her a painter and a fashion artist.
Yes, what I call her is a painter with a personal style of dress or something like that.
What are these other pieces we're going to see in the exhibit?
Kimonos. She had a beautiful collection of maybe some 20-odd kimonos. We have 4 or 5 of them on view. Kimonos were not something she wore out in the street. She wore them at home. They were bedwear, bathwear, and usually if she's wearing a kimono in a photograph, it's because she's had a love affair with that person.
I mean, you have a love affair with her,
Yes,
Georgia
indeed.
O'Keeffe, and it's clear from not only this book, which I want to talk about a little bit, but this exhibit. What was it like for you to curate this exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum? I mean, how exciting is it, and what goes into curating it?
Well, it's a big job. We've been working on it for 2 or 3 years just with the museum. I've been working on the project for over a decade. But what's wonderful about curating is you come up with a concept. You have what's called a checklist, and then you work with the staff and the team at the Brooklyn Museum that actually make it all happen. They decide what wall color it's going to have. They decide how you're going to walk through the exhibition, what the sequencing will be, although thankfully they have let me be a part of that installation. And so I feel very close to the way you're going to see things. And you're going to see things in context. It's going to be clothes in the context of paintings, in the context of photographs of her wearing either the exact same outfit or similar clothes throughout her lifetime.
Well, we do have some of the photographs. And you said Stieglitz, her husband. We also have some photographs of her by Ansel Adams as well.
Yes, Ansel Adams was sort of the heir to Stieglitz. He took over when Mr. Stieglitz hung up his calendar.
That's what it
camera.
was.
Yes, that's a Stieglitz right there, wrapped up in here. She is wrapped up in his cape, and she has a bowler hat on. That's the image that we use as the cover of the book and as our kind of exhibition image.
Yes. And there's Ansel Adams, right?
That's an Ansel Adams. She's looking as flirtatious as she ever does. This is also an Ansel Adams, several decades later.
Aaron was curious about the history of Georgia O'Keeffe as a sexual icon. What can you say about that?
Well, I don't know if she's a sexual icon so much as she is a icon in black and white, and her iconicity is really about her austerity and her, what shall we call it, her severity of dress, where everything is about black, touches of white, where the silhouette of her body is strong, but just look around to see if you find anything like buttons or internal decoration, and you'll see all of that has been wiped out in her style.
Why were her early works so controversial? The flowers.
Yes,
and
the flowers
how
were
were they
often
interpreted?
read. Well, the flowers were often read as sexually provocative, flowers that were substituting for parts of the female body, that kind of thing. And that has a history, that way of interpreting her.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, well, here's one with a great hole in the middle of it, this beautiful picture. It's a pastel of Lake George that you're seeing. That reading of those flowers as stemming from the female body was something that Stieglitz perpetuated. He started that idea. He taught critics to see it in the paintings. It was something that O'Keeffe came to regret. And after,
how so?
Well, she decided that everybody was reading paintings the way they wanted them read, as opposed to the way she felt when she was painting them. So she actually tried to find a few women critics who she felt would give her a fairer hearing.
And what did the women critics say?
It took her a couple of tries because the first ones also just had the party lying down. But eventually, she found a critic who actually talked about her love for and embrace of nature, which is the way she saw those flowers, rather than always seeing them as coming out of the womb, as Mr. Stieglitz would have said.
And all of these excellent aspects of O'Keeffe's life are on display at the Brooklyn Museum. I'm really excited.
Book,
oh yeah, this amazing book too.
I just want to point out that. How long did you work on this book?
Well, I've actually been writing at top speed for about 4 years.
Wanda Corn,
yeah.
Wow.
Living Modern Georgia O'Keeffe. It's like the definitive tomb.
Yeah, where do you
Georgia
begin
O'Keeffe.
when you want to put together this complete piece on Georgia O'Keeffe? It's remarkable, this book.
Yeah. Well, I begin first saying that it's worthwhile looking at her clothes to learn something new about her. I have to kind of, I feel, defend my subject matter, because it's living modern, but it's also dressing modern. And I think people won't quite get that until they see the exhibition, and then realize that she's a walking abstraction in black and white much of the time.
Do you have favorite parts of this book or favorite parts of Georgia O'Keeffe's history that you uncovered when you were researching
Well, I
it?
have surprise parts, and yes, I don't know if it's a favorite, but I was surprised the degree to which young designers today have taken her as a model or as a muse. And I found that out by just trolling in the on the internet.
A resurgence of interests in the works of.
They were actually, it's not the works; it's her body and the way she dressed.
Maybe it's this amazing book that has just come on the scene.
This is only being issued as of tomorrow, so I can't take any credit
The exhibit
for what's
starts
already in
2
fashion.
days, and then this goes out tomorrow. I want to know one more time about the exhibit and this book. This has to be my final question. I guess we have 1 minute. But where do you see her history in New York and her history in New Mexico blending in her art, as on display in the exhibit or in your book?
Well, in many, New York is responsible for her being a modern artist. New Mexico, we could say, becomes a whole new thematic subject matter for her. Bones, mountains, Pedernal, famous mountain that she painted over and over again. So I think she took her New York style and regionalized it when she went to New Mexico.
Oh, that's what we're all doing.
That's kind of what we're all doing. Wanda Corn is the curator of this exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum. It's a Georgia O'Keeffe exhibit. It's going to be fabulous. You have to see it. She's also the author of Living Modern, Georgia O'Keeffe, the amazing book. Wanda, thank you so much for being here. We're really looking forward to the exhibit. We hope you'll come back again sometime and talk about all your varied interests in arts.
Thank you very, very much. It's wonderful to be here. It means it's really happening.
It's really happening. We'll be there. Very
right
excited.
now.
See you at Brooklyn Museum.
Living Modern.
Yes.